All right. Now for our next segment of this show, I'm going to have a conversation with Pam Biladeau from IT. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you.
So as part of our listening sessions, closing the loop, we had some comments and questions about IT, Microsoft trainings, Microsoft, SharePoint, all those things we know and love so dearly. And so I thought I'd come to one of the experts on this. And can you fill us in on what's going on, Pam?
Well, thank you for having me. And you briefed me well on some of the issues and questions that are coming up around SharePoint and Teams. So what I'd like to do is start by describing what we see moving forward. We're looking to put everything in one cloud-based location. And by everything, I mean all of the documents, all of the information, everything that employees and the campus is using to keep business moving on around the college. The first one is OneDrive, which we all by now are familiar with. We did away with the Z drive. We're moving everything into the cloud. And these are where everybody's individual files will exist. And so herein lies one of our first moves is from the Z drive to OneDrive, no more Z drive. The cool thing about OneDrive is that it essentially lives on top of SharePoint. So as we're trying to share files or move files or anything like that, we have underlying all of this SharePoint. Individual employees can share files from their own individual OneDrive. So if you have a file that you just want to, you can even give people editing rights. Think of it like, I think a lot of people might use Google Docs, for example, very, very similar to that. It probably isn't our first recommendation on what we would tell people to use if they're sharing and co-editing things, because for one thing, if that employee ends up leaving and all the files that they've shared, their OneDrive goes away eventually after the employee leaves. So while it's a nice place to share files, it's probably not our first choice, but it can come in handy if you just want to do something really quick with a couple of team members. The second place is Teams, and I know that we probably get the most questions on Teams. And that is a place for departments to share and teams to share and collaborate and share files and information. This is something that we haven't really moved into fully as a college, and we're about to. In fact, what we really wanted to do was finish our SharePoint / intranet move first, which we just finished this past month. Which is what we see as our intra-departmental areas for information and document sharing. And I'm pretty sure everybody's had a chance, if you use the staff and faculty link, to see it. It's a work in progress. There's still things moving there. And we still have what we call the old SharePoint is still in use, but eventually that old SharePoint will go away. Larger project goal for this is to get all of our stuff into one location, cloud-based, helping anybody working remotely or here on campus is just seamless. Another thing that we want to encourage people to embrace is that Teams, which is the one that I think provides or offers some of the most challenge to people, although it's super helpful, there are elements to it that we're still learning and getting used to. Teams lives on top of SharePoint. Every single team has a SharePoint page behind it, and actually a SharePoint site behind it. And training for this is forthcoming. We just haven't really moved into it yet. What we want people to know is that we're eventually now going to be taking everything that's on the X drive, also known as the common drive, and moving it into Teams. But it's a big project. We're going to scope it. We're going to put a time frame on it and start working with the larger areas of the campus, the larger departments, and then work our way through. Anybody who's familiar with working with X Drive knows that it's very hierarchical in its structure. We've got the larger folders, and as you start drilling down into the departments, we've got folders and subfolders within those and permissions set accordingly. And it's something that we've had for decades upon decades, and everyone is used to it. So lifting that and bringing it over into Teams is a pretty big lift, but because Teams lives on SharePoint and we feel confident that people are pretty familiar, in fact, kind of love their SharePoint. We see this as being something that should be easy once we get it going.
Okay, so OneDrive's my space, right? My personal workspace and file folders, right? And then Teams would be like stuff I'm working in my department with,
Yes.
or other committees or councils and stuff.
Yes.
And then the SharePoint is like the college stuff.
Yes, the intranet where the service departments of the college can share all the information it takes to keep information out there, documents out there, how-tos, basically just to put the information out there so that if you're an employee here, you can look at those sites, or you can contact the department and say, how do I do such and such? And the expectation is the department will point you to the SharePoint rather than start sending email attachments, with how-to Word documents attached. And then people end up with various versions of how to do something or a form. I mean, we've seen this with IT, with HR, where we're like, oh, that you don't have the latest form. Here, let me send you the latest form. Instead, we'll be sending people to the SharePoint and have everybody get their information from there.
I have to admit, Teams makes me tremble with fear at times. And but I did look at some sites at the new intranet. I'm going to call it the new one and the old one. So the new intranet and the communications page had their accessibility stuff all in there. So I could go, oh, I need to learn how to do this accessibility stuff, and now I have these resources. Or I went to governance page and there's a site for GCC and it has the agendas and the minutes and so I guess what we'll have to do as employees is get trained to go and look there. We want to see like what's the agenda, when's the next meeting, that kind of thing.
Yes. And I think over time, employees will get used to just finding it on their own. And I think in the meantime, as we're all getting on board with the new intranet, that there's no harm in just calling that department or emailing that department or contacting them somehow and saying, where will I find this information? I know in the case of like the help desk, for example, the IT help desk, that's what we're going to be doing is saying, here's your link. Everything you need to know is right there. If you get stuck, let us know. So yeah, and then the other thing about Teams, since we're using Teams, but we just kind of put it out there and let people figure it out on their own, that's not our plan going forward. We really want to be able to have a training program once we've formalized that we're going into Teams and we're doing away with the X Drive. Everything is going to be in this larger SharePoint system on Microsoft servers. We fully plan to train and have training ongoing. It'll be a lot of hand holding. We're not just going to dump it out there and expect people to figure it out.
Oh, that's really good to hear because I've been thrown in buckets on Teams. I've been thrown in some other things. And I'm like, don't do that to me. Don't. I don't understand that. Well, you just go here. I'm like, I need training.
Yeah. And we want it to be intuitive. We want it to be simple, but it's a big system. So it's easy to maybe go down a rabbit hole and not mean to. So there is some getting used to it, but IT wants to be there on behalf of all the employees and make sure everybody feels good about it.
That's great. The other thing I learned is that if one day I wake up on a Monday morning, especially, and I don't have access that I had access to on Friday afternoon, all I have to do is call the help desk and they're like, oh, thanks for letting us know. We'll get it there. And it happens.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's
because that was pretty scary at 7:30 in the morning on Monday this week.
Yes, especially, you've got, things coming up right away for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Pam, for your time. Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I guess if I was to add anything, just feel free to reach out with any questions, concerns, curiosities. Love to get feedback on the new intranet because it is pretty new. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns.
All right. Thanks.
My pleasure.